I call to order this meeting of actually Sanitary District Number 2. We are your governing board. And tonight we are having a public hearing. It's our second public hearing on some sewer rate increases that were deemed necessary due to our master plan for sewers in order to keep up. So we will start with a roll call and a salute to the flag.
Okay. Board Member Casissa?
Here.
Board Member Lee?
Here.
Board Member Thomas?
Here.
Vice President Ravazio?
Here.
And President Beckman is absent from this meeting.
And if you'll join me in a salute to the flag, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we have open time now for public comment, and this is for things not on the agenda this evening. So do we have anybody who would like to address the board at this time? Come on up.
Madera. I just want to go on record to say I have several safety issues. You pulled permits for everything, right? For safety reasons?
So this is actually the Sanitary District Board meeting. We are just here to discuss at this time the sewer matter
Oh,
and matters
sorry.
related to the Sanitary
I
District.
do
So if you can
have
hold
some-
your comments till the actual town council meeting, which will start.
okay. No, Pat, I'm sorry. I got it mixed up. I didn't know this was 3
Okay.
minutes. I need to open my computer. Can you give me a minute to, or I don't know how to, I have to read.
Tiffany, I think you need to speak at the next meeting. This is strictly about the sewer rate increases, and we're not acting as the town council now. We're acting as the Sanitary District Board. Yes.
I would say if you have comments on the actual rate increases,
Uh-huh.
there will be an appropriate time during, after the staff presentation for that.
Well, it's
Item.
not all that, Adam. There's other things too. I'm sorry, I'm learning how to do this. I'm trying to bring up, does anybody else have to speak on it? I don't want to hold
So
up.
I don't think we have anyone else to speak. And Tiffany, you will have a chance to speak in a few minutes after we hear the staff report. And hearing the staff report might help you shape your comments as well.
It is on the sanitary district. Do you want me
Yes.
to wait?
No, you will have a chance to have your comments in just a few moments.
Okay, well, I'm
So I'm
ready
going to
now.
go ahead now and ask the staff to give the staff report.
Okay, but,
Okay?
all right.
Is
Pat,
that all
let me
right?
know.
Oh, so first we have to go, I'm sorry, to the consent calendar for the sanitary district. Do I have a motion regarding the consent calendar? Is there anybody who wants to take an item off the agenda on that consent calendar for discussion? Anyone on staff? Anyone on the council? Do I have a motion?
A motion to approve the consent calendar.
And just for the record, sorry to interrupt, we don't have any public comment for the consent calendar via email or any of the attendees via Zoom.
Should I make the motion again?
No, I got it. Was
we have
there
a
a
second?
second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Board Member Casissa?
Yes.
Board Member Lee?
Yes.
Board Member Thomas?
Yes.
And Vice President Ravazio?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Okay, we move on to item 5, which is the public hearing. Public hearing to consider and approve the proposed increases to the sewer service charges for July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025, and the following 4 years. We are going to open the public hearing to receive public comment on any and all written protests against the proposed sewer increase. And then following the public hearing, we will make a decision. So we do have a staff report, correct? And I hear we turn to RJ for that?
Yep.
Thank you, RJ.
Good evening, Vice President Ravazio. Thank you. Before I get started, just want to say that I'm going to be presenting with Fernanda Stefanik here of district staff, as well as Steve Gagnon from Raftellus, who should be joining us remotely. And then with that, I'm going to start my slideshow here. Sorry. First slideshow in the new building. All right. So we have two items here today. Really, we're talking about the hearing itself, and then also potentially a first reading and possible introduction of the ordinance that would accompany this potential increase. So want to start with a little bit of a background on kind of how we got here. We'll be covering this. These are kind of the agenda items for this particular item. We'll review some of the sewer master plan and CIP budget needs. This is really coming after a 2.5-year comprehensive effort looking at all of our sanitary district infrastructure, including 19 pump stations and all of our force mains and gravity systems as well. We'll touch on the history on the rates for the district ratepayers, and we'll review wastewater financial plan, as well as review wastewater potential rates. And then that's leading up to today, which is the ultimate hearing. So in general, these are typical goals of a sanitary sewer master plan. So evaluate the existing conditions. We also are in an active settlement agreement with a resource agency. So we want to make sure that whatever we come up with in our plan, that we are able to meet the conditions that we've agreed to with that. So that's another goal here of this particular one. We also wanted to move our overall network onto a GIS database, which really helps us track things dynamically and really make a lot of kind of daily operational decisions more efficiently. We want to develop a defensible CIP that really looks out at the next 10 years and meets the needs of the state water resource board's objectives to provide this necessary infrastructure to protect public health and safety. Perform a rate study analysis, and we also reviewed the vulnerabilities related to future sea level rise. So this goes back to spring of 2021, the ST2 board awarded a contract to a consultant, GHD, and their subcontractors to initiate this master plan effort. For the first year and a half, they did detailed field and desktop analysis of all of our ST2 infrastructure and started to develop some capital improvement budget needs. This first draft was presented to the board in October of 2023. And we obtained feedback and comments and revised the draft and continued on. We ended up having a special meeting in February to really engage the public and the board about some of the options that were before us in terms of rate financing, and even some of the capital improvement options with respect to kind of risk factors. This was later taken to our town finance committee for review to see that the overall financing plan that had been developed was sound. And then most recently in March on the 19th, we did take this to the board, where they adopted the sewer master plan and called for this public hearing today to consider increasing rates in the sewer service charges. So the existing conditions reviewed 44 miles of closed circuit television pipe. That's really looking at the interior of pipes in our network. That was footage that was taken over the last 10 years and evaluated for condition. We looked at 19 district pump stations and other vertical assets such as valves, force mains, and other things that go with pumped infrastructure. Some of the big recommendations that came out of this were really to upgrade the the Paradise Pump Station. This is our largest pump station. It conveys the majority of effluent from our district underneath Madera Creek and over to Central Men's Sanitation Agency. And it's has some deficiencies that currently put the district at risk. And so that was a priority item and estimated around $9.8 million to upgrade that. Along the force main that runs from Paradise Pump Station across the creek, there's a number of valves and other assets that have been in the ground and haven't been replaced or upgraded since the 80s or 90s. And so they're, in a corrosive environment at the end of their life. So those need addressing. That was part of the sewer master plan. And, really with that came, the discussion of how feasible it is to actually swap something out when you're relying on it basically every hour and every minute of every day. So there were some scenarios that ran with how you could go about swapping them one by one with these high risk nightly shutdowns, or you could build a bypass or redundant infrastructure that could be shifted over for a longer period of time while you go back and fix those. And then also would serve the district should there be any unexpected things down the line. So those were all analyzed as part of the sewer master plan. Adding the parallel force main to the south side of the creek is ultimately what the master plan ended on. And that's a price tag of about $11.5 million. We did look at going all the way across, but we felt that we had some contingency measures to address that gap should we have an emergency that's unexpected. Here's a breakdown of our 10-year CIP budget by category. So gravity mains are, basically the mains that flow downhill just using sloped pipes, 44 miles. We have vertical assets such as pump stations and pipes that have pressure that are forced by pumps. We have some of the other parts of our overall district funds and needs. It's just the operating, the maintenance, equipment, et cetera, et cetera. And really, when we look at our 10-year plan, we felt to be responsible and to meet the needs of the public safety and health, it was going to require $9.78 million. And currently our budget is closer to $6 million. So a need for, $3+ million per year to basically address the infrastructure needs. And so with that came, how do we solve for that additional funding? Before I go there, here's a map of these projects that have been recommended over the next 10 years. You can see this light blue or cyan line. That's a redundant pipeline that will go from our Paradise Pump Station right there by San Clemente all the way to the south side of Madera Creek. We have a number of pipes that have been identified as structural category 5, which is the worst condition out of all, that will be replaced. And we have several pump stations that are have deficiencies or are at the end of their service life and need rehab or significant upgrades. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our consultant at Raftellus, Steve Gagnon, who can walk us through some of his work through the rate study and report that he's worked on. So go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, RJ. Good evening, board members. Can I just check that everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So before we get into a few background slides, this slide shows the history of annual rate increases, and there hasn't been any rate increases since 2010. Rates were set in 2010. And what this slide shows is that if rates were allowed to increase in line with inflation, which is the solid green line, the CPI inflation, or what is known as the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index, which is the red line, if rates were allowed to increase along with either of those two indices, The current yearly charge would be $749 in 2023. And we're about to show you the proposed rate increases, which is a little under $749. Next slide, please. And one may ask, why weren't rates increased sooner? This slide was put together by staff. So an answer to that question is the bulk of the current staff started in 2018 and beyond. And at that time, there was a capital surplus of about $12 million. And I can say firsthand, having set rates for 15 years in California, that it can be a little tough to increase rates when the public sees that you have a sizable reserve. You're hanging on to a sizable reserve. So I think the thought at that time was that we probably have enough reserves to get through a certain period of time. But since then, there's been a handful of projects, as shown in the bullet points here. And of course, there's the sewer master plan and the rate study at the bottom. Next slide. So let's start with a few introductory slides. First, what is a rate study? A rate study is a financial planning process to set rates that first and foremost wants to promote a financially viable utility. That means it needs to cover all your costs. It needs to cover O&M, capital, which RJ just talked about, debt service if applicable, and then you also need to fund reserves. A rate study also considers community values, things such as conservation, affordability, fairness, revenue stability. And lastly, but not least, we have to make sure that the rates are legally defensible, and that means that they meet Proposition 218. Next slide, please. So why would Sanitary District 2 do a wastewater rate study? Well, essentially, it's the top bullet point there. Rates must keep up with costs to operate the district's wastewater system. And I know the board knows this, but sometimes the public doesn't know that the SD2 is a self-funding enterprise. It's funded by customer rate revenue. Therefore, it's not like other government services such as police, fire, and parks that are funded by tax dollars. It's essentially a nonprofit business. The board is running a business and it needs to decide what should we charge our customers. So rate revenue needs to pay for everything. It needs to pay for O&M expenses. It needs to pay for capital. It needs to pay debt service. It needs to fund reserves. And of course, by law, Prop 218, rates must be based on the cost to operate and maintain the water system, wastewater system, no more and no less. Next slide, please. So why do rates need to be adjusted? As we mentioned before, rates have not increased since 2010. And everyone's been watching the news. We know what inflation has done since COVID. In fact, I was on a site today, and since 2010, inflation has increased by 50%. Your wholesale wastewater treatment costs from central Marin sanitation districts has gone up, and they are planning a 4.5% increase this year, followed by more increases in the future. And lastly, you just heard RJ talk about the capital that is being funded by these rate increases. And the district plans on investing $45 million over the next 5 years, and about half of that would be funded through debt issuances, which we'll show you in a second. So let's go through the financial plan. Next slide, please. And as part of a financial plan, of course, you have to cover your costs, but something that is sometimes forgotten is you also have to plan for reserves. All of my clients have reserves, and these are typical reserves in front of you right here. There's an operating and maintenance reserve, and that's 25% of your yearly O&M costs. We plan for a CIP reserve, which is 75% of an average year of capital investment. That's around $6 million. You have a rate stabilization reserve, which is $2.5 million. So when you add all of that up, it's roughly $10 million that you need to plan for when you set rates. Next slide, please. Sometimes it can be useful to answer the question, what if we did not increase rates? And this slide here shows what would happen to your reserve balances. Of course, it assumes that you wouldn't find any efficiencies, so to speak, and you would do the CIP that RJ talked about, that you would execute it. And if you did that, you could see that your reserve balances would go negative below the zero axis there in fiscal year 25, and it would only get worse after that. So What we're proposing is to set rates such that you collect 40% more revenue than what you're currently recovering in fiscal year 25. And then 30% more revenue in the year after that, 20, 8%, and then 5%. And it also assumes two debt issuances of $10 million in fiscal year 25 and 10 in fiscal year 27. And so with those revenue increases, the bottom two graphs show your financial health, if you will. On the left is your debt coverage ratio. And that the darker green line has to be above the light green line because the light green line is your minimum debt coverage requirement. And it is, so that's good. And then on the right, it shows your ending fund balances. And those three lines that you see on the chart, the red one is your operating reserve goal. The light blue one is operating in capital. And then finally, the dark green one is operating capital and rate stabilization. So the last year of the study is fiscal year 29. You can see it does go up and down a little bit every year. And that's because some years you're funding your CIP from debt. Other years you're funding from cash. So when you fund from cash, you draw down on those reserves. But you can see we're setting rates such that at the end of the study, which is fiscal year 29, the last bar on the right graph there, you will essentially be almost at your operating and capital reserve. You won't reach your rate stabilization reserve, but you will reach two of your reserves. And so the rates for that in the next slide are shown in this table. You currently charge $500, that's annually, and that does include a $2 county tax billing fee. So your actual charge is $498, but if you add the $2, it's $500. And then what we're saying for one sewer equivalent dwelling, which is one single family home, that yearly charge would go from $500 to nearly $700 in the first fiscal year, in fiscal year 25, which starts on July 1st, 2024. And then after that, it would go to $900, $1,000, just under $1,200, and then a little over $1,200. So that's for single family. And in this last slide, I think I have some good news, which is everybody loves to know what are their neighbors charging? What are their neighbors doing? It's a natural thing to want to know what everyone else is doing. And I think this is good news. First, it shows that you're the lowest of your peers. And if you were to adopt this proposed charges, you would still be second to lowest amongst your peers. So I think that is one way of saying you're being prudent with your costs and you're not overcharging. So you're on the right end of the spectrum. And I think from here, I turn it back over to you, RJ.
Thank you, Steve. So that's the end of our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions from the board or the public. Thanks.
Okay, do we have any questions from up here? If not, we'll go. Oh, you do?
Just a couple. Amy, can you just describe the process that we had to go through to get to this point from a legal and regulatory standpoint, just on a high level?
Yes. RJ covered many of the points in his presentation. They completed the master plan to assess what costs would need to happen. And then knowing that we were going to need additional finances, we hired the rate study, Raftellus, to do the rate study. And there are legal requirements for the rate study under Prop 218 to make sure that the sanitary district cannot make a profit. We can only raise revenue that meets the costs. And it has to be proportionate so that everyone, buildings pay the same rate. We then had several public hearings, several workshops. We had public hearings on the master plan. We had a workshop on the financial plan. And then we had a discussion at the March 19th hearing at which council decided to call this public hearing to raise the rates. As required by law, we gave written notice to every every property owner of record within the district, which explained the basis for the rates and the process. And that leads us up to today, where we'll have the public hearing. And we will take public comment. We will accept any of the written protests. People were informed that they had a right to protest in writing. We will then, after taking public comment, we will have the clerk open those protests. She will count them. If a majority of members of the district are opposed, council cannot increase the rates. If there are less than a majority, then council can then make the determination and take the vote on whether or not to raise the rates as outlined in RJ's presentation.
Thanks. And how many members are in the district or approximately?
Approximately 6,000.
Thanks.
Any other questions? So we'll move on to public comment. If anyone has a comment on this, you may come to the podium now.
I would like to see citizens sit down with council, who isn't being paid enough, and take back the 900 you're getting. If you're honest and you're hardworking, you deserve every cent and more. It's chicken feed. Now, I think there's a clever way of working things out. And what I would like to see is simplicity and people getting together in the town and sitting down and working this way. Now, I wrote this out, so I'm going to read it. Hello, town council members and fellow Corte Maderans. Thank you for serving. I am here tonight to oppose the proposed waive in sewer taxes. Citizens already pay too many taxes and object to paying more. I propose the town of Corte Madera and concerned citizens of Corte Madera sit down together and go over the town's finances to determine a way of repairing the sewer without raising taxes. I propose this be done in a series of no less than 5 public meetings held within the year. Please give citizens that chance. I have a question. $15 million was spent to construct a beautiful town hall, but was it absolutely necessary at this time? Were town employees going to be working out in the rain if we didn't build this $15 million town hall at this time? Instead of building a $15 million town hall at this time, my preference would have been to have put the $15 million the new town hall cost into the bank so that that $15 million could have accrued interest. And that interest could have gone toward sewer repair so our taxes would not be raised. After that, we could have planned to build a beautiful new town hall. I also have another idea. I would like to see a cushioning for taxes. The taxpayer is so burdened in so many ways with so many taxes. I think there should be money in the bank accruing interest, and every time the town council has to raise taxes, that interest can be taken out, and those issues like sewer can be solved. So what I would like to see, and I hope you consider it, is a get-together with citizens and seeing if there's some way around raising money or not having to pay more sewer taxes. So thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Do we have anyone else in the audience who'd like to speak?
Oh, shades are coming. Good evening, George Topa. I understand the need for the increase and I understand the need for the work, and I was thrilled by seeing all of this. And I understand that you're newbies, as it mentioned. Average started, 6 years ago? But a lot of you have lived in the town and have looked at, I hope, have looked at your property tax bills and said, why? And when I say that, I feel like Rip Van Winkle. Every 14 years, the council wakes up and says, oh, we need more money for the sewers because we didn't raise the rates for 14 years. You've done it twice now. If you would have just put a CPI inflation factor on, you would have picked up $5 million in the meantime. You would have had that in the bank, okay? So what I'd like you to do is consider this going forward so that at the end of 4 or 5 years, it's a CPI increase, and it should also go on to the paramedic tax, which is the only other tax that directly affects every citizen that you control. And this way, you wouldn't have to pay for an election. You wouldn't have to hire consultants to put these presentations together. You could take the word of the staff and say, this is what we need. And we have the money in the bank and we're done with it, kind of thing. The other thing I would like to see, which I've spoken about several times, is why can't sewer rates be based on usage? They're based on usage for commercial properties. Why can't it be done for residential properties? When I brought this up with your predecessor and finance directors, I get, oh, it's too much work. I don't know why it's too much work, because you do it for commercial properties. Why does someone who lives in 1,000 square foot home pay the same for sewer service as someone who lives in a home 5, 6, 7,000 square feet? So that is something that perhaps could be done in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time and your ideas. Is there anyone else here in the chambers that would like to make a public comment?
I'm John
Hi.
Davis. Hello. I'll piggyback on what that gentleman said and say that another way of sort of spreading the cost perhaps more equitably would be to go on property values or income values. I believe you have our income, our tax statements, access to them. So I understand that it could be difficult to measure how much sewage waste my home has, but there are other ways of sort of equitably distributing that cost. I as well think it's a shame that we've come to this point where the town has is trying to railroad through giant increases in tax rates that many citizens of our community cannot afford. A lot of people are on fixed incomes and they haven't seen raises in a long time or don't have opportunity to get raises. My neighbor, for example, she reads her mail diligently. Somehow she didn't know about this tax rate increase. She contacted me regarding the sewer inspection requirement that you've also put through, which is burdensome. And when I told her about this tax increase, it's a much bigger surprise and burden to her as well. So I know you've done the minimum legally to notify the public about your proposal. That seems a done deal. But it hasn't reached everyone. I also think that the public should have a say in these types of decisions. We're not stupid. I have an engineering background, a business background. We can understand numbers very well. We can make decisions. We're fiscally responsible. We're homeowners. We raise families in this community. And I believe that it's not responsible of this town council to not involve us in decisions, to not put this up for a vote. My understanding is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but that the public voted against this building being built. And town council went forward and decided to build it. And that money, I have a feeling that other people like myself would have preferred to keep in reserve, perhaps use for sewer expenses. Also, this all sounds great. We could all have gilded fixtures in our home or a redundant system, but there are other solutions at hand. Even this gentleman mentioned, there are other ways of turning off valves rather than building a giant, expensive, redundant system. So I think there could be more study. There could be, you don't have to buy everything all at once. I'm a homeowner. If my budget doesn't afford, new paint on the walls, I figure out something else to do. I postpone it, I defer it. There are also many other ways to raise money than just increasing rates.
Thank you very much for your comments. Do we have anyone else in the room who'd like to comment? Are there any other online commenters who might be waiting?
We do not have any hands raised online, and we didn't receive any emailed public comment for this item.
And are there any additional written comments, written protests that have come in?
So we did receive written protests. Were there any additional? Okay.
Would staff like to address any of the issues brought up in the comments?
Yeah, and I'm happy to touch on some of these. So there was the comment or suggestion about using town funds for sewer fees, and that's just not a legal option that we have at our disposal, unfortunately. I do think George had a good point about CPI infrastructure, and I think, on a move forward basis, that's the ideal situation. So that is of the mindset of the staff, and I believe the board as well. Usage-based fees, they can get complicated. For one, when you do that for commercial, you look at water usage in the winter months because you're not using landscaping. And I think what you would find is, for one, you'd have a pretty big swing in the usage. But the other thing is, how do you quantify the infrastructure for various properties in town? For instance, someone who lives on the top of Christmas Tree Hill has to go through a lot more pipes and pump stations to get to the ultimate destination of CMSA versus someone who say is right next to Paradise Pump Station. So you start getting into that detail, and it starts opening up new questions in terms of overall equity. So just something to think about. I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, but just it is a complex subject. We do have some low income grants for those that are truly in low incomes. Those are really for if they are triggered for a private sewer lateral. So hopefully anyone who is in that position is aware, should they get triggered to upgrade their facility per our ordinance. And the other one is, I mentioned risk and pump stations, and Paradise Pump Station being our largest pump station, it handles over 1 million gallons a day of sewage. And if it fails, we really have no option. We would then most likely be just polluting the bay. And the Port of Cologne Act fines $10 per gallon. So, even a day at 10 gallons or $10 per gallon a day, that's $10 million per day, assuming you can actually fix the repair in a day, which isn't always the case. So just some things to think about. And then lastly, just on the workshops and just outreach. I think I mentioned in my presentation, we brought the first draft in October. We had a special workshop really to engage the public. We brought it back to our board in March on the 19th for another round of discussion. And so here we're, having our fourth discussion here with the community. We did send mailers on this last one. We've also been putting sandwich boards all over town. I think for the workshop, we probably put 20 A-frames in really every part of town. So we're doing what we can. We're doing news blasts. We're doing webpage outreach. So that's just kind of the effort we've gone through thus far.
Thank you. And then if I could just have Adam address the issue of whether or not this building was ever put up to a vote
absolutely.
in the community.
Yeah, and I would also say we also had a finance committee meeting, and I know the board really wanted to pause at the point in the process to make sure that we did additional outreach on finance aspect of this sewer rate increase. With respect to, and I know this can be confusing and for members of the public who haven't come to these meetings very often, but really the sanitary district board and the town council are two separate entities. The Sanitary District 2 is a special district. It has its own financial statements. It has its own audit. It is a completely separate entity from the town, and the finances are separate and apart from each other. And so you'll see when we go through, really the revenues for the Sanitary District do not include any town revenues or revenues that are accrued to the town balance sheets at the end of the day. And so they're distinct and separate, and the district is expected to raise its revenues needed to support infrastructure and maintenance and improvements as explained in the sewer master plan study, what is needed. And so I just say that the point made about sort of saving money on the town side of things, ultimately going to the benefit of the sanitary district, is not an accurate statement of how the finances would work.
And I just add in a few things. Prop 218 amended the California Constitution, and the rate study, some of what we've done from this is required by the California Constitution. So we have to do this kind of financial planning. We have to do a rate study. We have to give notice, written notice to every property owner, and the notice gave instructions on how to protest. So that is essentially the written protests are the vote of the population. And if a majority of the people file their written protest, council cannot raise the rate.
I mean, one more thing to recognize is the distinction between the two agencies, or essentially, SD2 as well encompasses more properties outside of the town of Corte Madera. So there's residents in Tiburon and Larkspur that are also essentially constituents of SD2 or Sanitary District 2. And so obviously town finances to go to support that also creates, even if that was a possibility, would go to support residents outside of the town.
Okay, I think now we can, if we have a less than 50% majority of residents served by the sanitary district who have submitted, how many do we have?
Yes, we need to close the public hearing.
Oh, I thought I closed the public hearing after that. I'm sorry. Okay, so wait, we did not have a chance though for anyone on the board. Do you have any comments?
They can comment after the public
Okay.
hearing is closed.
Okay. All right, so we'll close the public hearing.
Okay. And we received a total of 7 protests. The number of written protests are less than a majority of the property owners in the district.
Okay, so with that, do I have any comments from the board or a motion?
Well, I just have 2 other questions, sorry. One is, will we be providing any additional notices if this passes or when it passes to residents? So it's not sticker shock like we pass it tonight and all of a sudden on my next property tax bill, I see the increase. Will there be any other further? I know it may not be required, but is it something that we would consider?
Yeah, my understanding it's not required, but it's really a question of whether that's money we want to spend. It would cost roughly $7,000 to $8,000 to mail. So, or we could use other less costly types of engagement, social media, website, et cetera.
I would, if I just, I would, recommend putting it on the website and do those sorts of outreach. There's nothing, part of the reason to put the information out there is at the time we did was so that people could come and sort of discuss whether or not to protest those rates. If we do it after the fact, it sort of has a benefit of not really allowing people to sort of come back.
And it
have
also
comment on
will
rates.
show up on people's county tax roll ahead of the actual taxes. So they should be aware of it ahead of when it comes due.
Okay, and then the other question is also, because I think it was valid comments, how do we keep this on our radar screen? So 4 years from now, if there's changeover in staff, we're not sitting here waiting another 10 years and it's like, well, we had all new staff and nobody realized it. How do we keep it on the radar? So 4 years from now, we can look at either doing another rate study, doing CIP increases, or figuring it out so we don't go through sticker shock again.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think Doing a master plan is good practice to have one completed every 10 years. So, we just completed one, we probably got to start another one in 7, because there's certain things that staff cannot evaluate. We don't have the specialty crews and equipment to go into force mains and to really, run flow tests on pump stations and that sort of thing. So that's always going to be a prudent thing to do at some timeline. And then in terms of rates, obviously we have a budget, a CIP budget here that's built out for the next 10 years. So we can't control what inflation does. We can't control what construction costs do, but the current rates could even potentially fund us through 10 years, under reasonable circumstances. But in the case that things go up in inflation or because construction costs, that's when we would consider something more on the lines of a CPI update in year 5 and 6 and beyond. But really, I think the hope is that even if, hopefully a portion of the people in the room today are here and paying attention and can ask those questions, when the time comes in, 4 years, 5 years, so that we're on track.
And this question is for Amy. So at any time, even if we put in a provision that we would have a specific rate of increase every year, would we still need to do a rate study if ever rates were increased?
So by law, we can set increases for 5 years. After that, we're required to do another rate study and go through this process again to do increases. So the way it is now, there'll be an increase for 5 years and then they'll stay at year 5 unless we go through this process again and want to increase rates. So I think I think keeping in mind the CPI and eyeing the budget and the plans with that in mind is really helpful. And I think it's this is the kind of long range planning that RJ and his team are doing. But if we find that projection isn't enough, then we'll have to come back and we'll go through this process again, notify the public, go through the plan and the rate study. So everyone will be aware.
Thank you.
So I'd just like to add, all these recordings are available for the public. I can remember we stayed till 11 o'clock one night with no one in the room and discussed the very things that, people are asking about tonight. So please go back and watch those if you really want to hear how much diligence went into this decision before we're committing to it. I think it's important to know that we did discuss what the 10-year is. And part of the reason it went back to the finance committee was how much we were going to borrow and give the illusion that you have cheap rates when you're really paying debt service that was way more expensive and ultimately hamstrung the sewer district for 30 years. So I appreciate everybody wants to keep the lowest fees possible, but the deterioration of them through this plan and the new infrastructure testing that we have and the tracking that we've enabled over the last few years with software and everything really identified a much longer trajectory update that is needed. And we have to finance it in this 5-year cycle. And so that was a lot of what we explored about how to do that properly. And it wasn't that we excluded anyone. Anyone could have come and given feedback at that time. It's just now that we're presenting it, you can give feedback, but it's a challenge to actually the things that we've already brought forward. And it might be difficult to reverse at this time because it is the best solution for not the town, but the sanitary district, which we're currently discussing, which is just the sewer system and all the different accoutrements that go along with that. And the other thing is while RJ is the public works director, he plays a dual role and he's one of the only staff that really does this. And there isn't always the same public works director and a sewer board director, right? So that's another important thing to understand is he's a very special entity that can holistically see the benefits of both and coordinate sewer upgrades to road upgrades and everything else. He's a very valuable employee, and the way he addresses all the town's needs and infrastructural needs, either on the sanitary board or anywhere else, are impeccable and some of the best in the state, I would say, award-winning, as we often find out. So I just want to say that out loud and let
Thank
people
you.
know that with that confidence, if I vote on that, that's how I feel about it. I do appreciate all the feedback, and I hate paying more money. I don't have any money either, and I hate paying it. But, to actually make the pipes work and flow and not have basically what RJ described as a lawsuit liability and the cost that would be, it's actually quite cheap to do the CPI, which is really a maintenance plan and an infrastructural upgrade that actually gives us a long-term trajectory of better fiscal health for the 10-year plan, where we could even out, right? Versus doing nothing and having one of those pipes explode and we lose $35 million and still have shitty pipes. So I think we really need to understand what this is. This isn't just a tax grab, some kind of money grab. This is about improving the infrastructure, because we now have the capabilities and the staff that cared enough to do it correctly. And we got sued because we hadn't been. And it's not that the town's people have been here since 2018, it's the staff. So the reason they put that in there is because the staff that was responsible for those decisions that led to that lawsuit are no longer here. So let's be clear about what that date was and what it was really speaking to. I've been here a lot longer. I always struggle to pay my taxes at the end of the year. It's always like a break-even thing. But in sitting for meeting after meeting, I don't know that we have any other choice. So that's.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Charles. I agree with what Charles said, that we put many more hours and thought into this than many of you realize. And also the finance committee that's been referred to a couple of times is a group of volunteers who understand finances, and they work to keep the town on track. And this council took a moment and said, okay, we don't feel comfortable doing this. We want it to go to our volunteer financial council. So if any of you are interested in serving on that or knowing more about it, there are ways to get involved at a time when you really can make a difference. And with that, do I have a motion? Or can I get a motion, please? And they're requesting that you read the entire thing. Either of you.
Well, okay, I'll do it. I would like to make a motion to approve resolution number 4, 2024, finding that the proposed action is not a project as defined in the California Environmental Quality CEQA Public Resource Code section. And even if it were a project, the proposed action is statutory exempt pursuant to 14 CCR section rates, tolls, fares, and charges, and as such is not a subject to environmental review. Establishing the annual sewer user service charges for building connected to the district sewer system for July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025, and the following 4 years, and continuing thereafter until revised by the district.
Do I have a second? Thank you. Rosa.
Board Member Casissa.
Yes.
Board Member Lee.
Yes.
Board Member Thomas.
Yes.
Vice President Ravazio.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
And now we move on to 5B.
The
which
resolution is approved.
So sorry?
The resolution is approved.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
We move on to the first reading and possible introduction of an ordinance repealing ordinance number 43, which establishes the existing annual sewer usage charge for buildings connected to the district sewer system. Can we get a staff report on this?
The staff report was part of the prior presentation. What we're doing right.
Summarize maybe?
Yeah,
Or
we're
we-
just, all we're doing on this item is we have our current sewer rates were established by ordinance. So we are repealing that ordinance because we've just adopted new sewer rates by resolution.
So we don't need a staff report.
No, so that is
That's your
part of the
summary.
item is that we've now set new sewer rates. So we just need to clean our books and get rid of the old ordinance.
Do I need to ask for public comment on this?
Yes.
So are there any comments from the public regarding this repeal of the old ordinance which set our sewer rates? Okay, and with that, bring it back to council for any
And,
comments.
Madam Vice President, we don't have any public comment
Comment online,
on
okay.
Zoom or via email.
Thank you for asking.
Or stating.
Is there a motion? Do we need a motion?
Should I read the motion? I'll just read this. I move that, I make the motion that well, this is just an introduction. Okay.
So we
I'd like
don't
to
really need it?
No, I need to just introduce it. I'll introduce the ordinance. This would be helpful. Okay, now I'll do it. I'll introduce the ordinance repealing ordinance number 43, which establishes the existing annual sewer user service charge for buildings connected to the district sewer system.
Okay, so with that, we can move on?
You need a
Was there a second?
Oh, we need a second and a.
I'll second.
Okay.
Sorry.
Board Member Casissa?
Yes.
Board Member Lee?
Yes.
Board Member Thomas?
Yes.
And Vice President Ravazio?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Okay, then moving on to item 6A, which is consideration and possible action to authorize the district manager to award a construction contract for the Paradise Pump Station Rehabilitation Project, project number 23202 to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. You have a staff report. I'll let you.
Yes,
bring
thank you,
the details for it.
Vice President Ravazio. Let me share my screen one more time. So this item has been at the board several times. For the last 2 winters, we've had some pretty close calls at our Paradise Pump Station, our largest pump station, where we've had failures and the system has actually shut off for a period of time. We've had, pump and in particular variable frequency drive failures, which really control the pumps. And so it's been a high risk situation for several winters, and it requires a lot of, time, effort, and hands on the ground at all hours of the night during these winter storms, and really just poses a big risk given some of the factors I mentioned with over 1 million gallons of sewage on an average day, not to mention higher peak values during storm systems. So early 2023, we approached the board about initiating a contract with Schaff and Wheeler, a design consultant, to initiate a project to remedy many of these deficiencies. They had completed the design earlier this year. The estimate for that project was $8.2 million. We recently received favorable bids on May 14th with the lowest responsible and responsive bidder, C.Overa at company, at $6,081,000. So, significantly below estimate, which is a great value to the district. And we would recommend moving forward with this project. But I do want to mention that we do, given the state of the rates and the bonding, which we're targeting potentially later this year, many of the funds are not at this moment in our possession. We have asked the consultant to estimate what cash flow we will need through the end of the year. And so they've developed a chart that shows the expected cash flow needs. And toward the end of the year, they are estimating upwards of 11%, and by next spring, 20%. So we do have ample funds through the end of the year. We have $1.3 million budgeted for this item, which will get us through the year, which should be enough time to go through the bonding and financing process, which will then identify the remainder of the funds. So want to make sure that was brought to your attention. And otherwise, we're requesting a 15% contingency given the complexity of this project and risk of this being, an active pump station. And we want to make sure that it goes as smooth as possible.
Okay, any
That'll answer
questions
questions.
from the board? All finished? Any questions from the board?
I always get nervous when I know we probably have to take a contractor with the lowest bid.
Mhm.
What due diligence did you do on this contractor? What other types of work have they done in the area? Especially when I think we're looking at like 2 million or so below what you guys were estimating.
So they are a well-known contractor. They've done lots of, these are kind of pushing in the heavy arena of projects. But as you mentioned, the public contract code does not really factor that into the decision. We are basically obligated to take the lowest responsible and responsive bidder. And if we don't, it's potentially unethical. So they did meet all of our qualifications. They have, we have some criteria for certain finance ratings that they've achieved. We have certain criteria for number of projects that they've achieved. They have the required licenses. So yeah.
And then usually don't you build in 10% contingency, but this one you're building in 15?
Yeah.
Can you just maybe get in the high level, some of the complexities you were mentioning?
Sure. Yeah. So, we'd love to be able to kind of freeze time and not have any sewage go through this pump station during the project. But the reality is we have to maintain that $1 million or 1 million gallons a day of sewage going through. So we have to establish some temporary bypasses and do a number of shutdowns to really cross over that effluent. We're also dealing with a number of specialty mechanical parts and also SCADA systems and other electrical components. And so these are for monitoring and other things. And so a lot of those through these types of bids can, it's possible that things aren't, there's potential for more unforeseens than say paving a roadway, right? So it's just a highly complex project. It's a high risk project. And we want to make sure we have ample contingency so that we aren't taking unnecessary risks along the way and hopefully deliver a project very efficiently and successfully without spills or other things.
And this amount's locked in, right? Because I think work won't start until the spring of 2025, right? Which you're looking at like 8 or 9 months down
Right.
the road. I know a lot of construction costs, a lot of things can change, but this is locked in.
Yeah. So bulk of the physical work on site will occur in 2025. We'll spend a lot of time right now going through the submittal review process, confirming that all the equipment that's about to be ordered meets the specs. We'll order it. It'll be, fabricated and constructed for the next, several months before we actually start the work. And so, yes, we are locked in a sense. At the same time, if for some reason the unforeseen happened and we had some major reason not to get a bond and not have the other revenue, we would have to potentially look at options to terminate the contract and minimize our losses. So it's not that they are guaranteed the full amount, but it's rather if the project goes all the way through, they're guaranteed. But if we do stop short, we would have to see how much they've spent to date and what is reasonable to cover them in terms of a termination of that contract.
Okay. And then worst case, there is a contingency in there. If for whatever reason we didn't get bond financing, that we could pull out of the contract.
Yeah. So that's where we would consider, opportunities to suspend the work and still stay in contract and negotiate a change order to push it along until when we do have financing, or we would have to negotiate or force a termination and go through that whole process.
All right, thanks. And I'm just looking at worst case. Thanks.
So you were saying like this next year, it's really long lead item
Yep.
procurement, which is a down payment to establish it. It's not until delivery that we would pay the bulk in 2025.
Correct. Yeah, we'd be basically, if you were to order a vehicle that, doesn't arrive off the lot, it's built in a factory. So we're putting the money down and then the parts come, 6 to 10 months out. And then once they're here, we put them in the ground. So yeah, if we had to terminate, we'd be likely on the hook for that equipment that was purchased, but not necessarily the remainder of the contract.
Always in those submittals in the contract, put clauses.
Yep.
But I didn't get a sense from our bond rating and the general kind of discussions about that there's really a risk of fiscal insolvency related to it. So, and the contingency is not really about fiscal insolvency, right? It's really about the risk of getting into the system with different pipes and pieces that you don't know how they're going to react when you start opening them up, right? And so that's why they've added on the extra 5.
I'm sorry, I have one more question for you. Because it looks on the subject, it's authorized you to do the bid for the 6 million plus and then 15% contingency, but there's another 10%, right, for management services. Where does that 10% come into play? It looks like we're only authorizing
Yeah.
pieces.
So we will be bringing in a specialty construction management group to oversee this specialty work. We still have to go out to RFP to interview consultants for that. So we don't have a dollar amount or consultant identified, but we'll be, interested in other proposals from consultants, and we'll be interviewing and reviewing applications and selecting. And so for now, we've estimated 10% of the project cost for that.
Okay, then you'll come back to us once you get that nailed down, right?
If needed, we typically have not on a construction management contract, but we can discuss that.
But if it stays within that 10% budget, we're approving it now. If ultimately it deviates way outside of that, he'd probably want to bring it
Right, but what
back.
I'm getting at is when you look at the subject, it doesn't mention the 10% in what we'd be making a motion on. So we'd have to add that to the motion, up to 10%.
Or is that already
So
included?
we've typically,
Would you build it in?
if it's built into the budget, it's, it's going to be as we go into our budget cycle. We're going to have it as a line item. It'll be part of that approval potentially.
Okay, I guess where I'm getting confused is I see fiscal impact, construction costs is 6 million, 15% contingency, and then you have an asterisk for the additional 10%. If I read the way the subject is, it doesn't include the 10% unless I'm missing something.
Well, so that's the net construction amount of 7. We're only awarding the bid, but the total is
So
7
yeah,
million.
that'll be included in the proposed budgets and potentially would be approved at that time. It has not been yet, but we wanted to make sure that it's fully transparent and shown here now.
So we're not actually approving that 10%. Okay.
Okay, is that clear, everybody? Okay, so I think we just need a motion.
I
Oh,
don't remember
public comment.
taking
Do we
public
have a public
comment, but there aren't any hands raised and there isn't any emailed public comment for this item.
Does anybody here want to talk about this podium? Okay. So with that, do we have a motion?
I can make a motion for the district manager to award a construction contract for the Paradise Pump Station Rehabilitation Project, project number 23202, to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, C. Overay and Company, for the base bid amount of $6,081,000 and authorize a 15% construction contingency of $912,150 for a total not to exceed amount of $6,993,150.
Second.
Board Member Casissa,
Yes.
Board Member Lee,
Yes.
Board Member Thomas.
Yes.
Vice President Ravazio.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
So then finally on this meeting's agenda tonight is the district manager and board member reports.
No report. Thanks.
Any report from any of our board members? Okay, then I think we can also discuss the draft agenda for the upcoming board meeting. Any concerns about that? Anybody? All right, with that, we will adjourn.